Finding tank mates for your betta can often be difficult, so you may be asking yourself, can betta fish live with snails? If so, then keep watching to find out. So can betta fish live with snails? In general, adding a snail or two to your tank will not cause your betta to become aggressive. Sometimes your betta may pick or nibble at them, but this is because of curiosity more than aggression. However, this also depends on your betta. If you know that your betta is aggressive, then you should avoid any other tank mates. But if you're not sure, then you should add a snail to see. Do bettas eat snails? Bettas will eat anything in your tank, so if given the chance, they'll try to eat your snails too. Because of this, it's important to try and buy snails that aren't small. Larger snails are a lot harder to eat, and while your betta may still try to get at the fleshy parts of your snail, a fully grown one is going to have a much better chance of defending itself. You shouldn't think that if you introduce a snail to your tank, your betta will always eat it. Many betta owners have had a snail in their tank for years without any issues, and there are ways to minimise the chance of your betta trying to eat your snails. The biggest one, of course, is making sure your betta gets a balanced diet. This includes giving them a combination of fish pellets and live food. Also, snails have defense mechanisms put in place to stop them from being eaten. Some of them have a trapdoor-like hinge which they can use to stop predators from eating them if they can shut it quickly enough. So while it is possible for bettas to eat snails, you can limit the chance of this happening. The different types of snails. There isn't just one type of snail to add to your tank, there's a whole variety of different and exciting breeds, and it's important to make sure you choose the right ones, because some snails are harder to keep alive than others. If you can't keep your snail alive, then you risk contaminating your tank with a decaying body. First of all, turret snails. Turret snails, also called Malaysian trumpet snails, are the first type of snail you can add to your aquarium. They grow up to 1.5 inches and live for around about a year. Also, they require the same temperature and pH as bettas, which means they are going to thrive in your betta's tank. They are great beginner snails because they don't need much upkeep. As long as the water conditions are good, they will thrive in your tank. A turret snail's behaviour is pretty much the same day by day. You'll often see them foraging around on the gravel looking for any leftover debris. They commonly eat any food missed by your betta or dead plants and algae. Because they spend most of their time on gravel, it's important to find gravel that's good for them. If you have gravel with sharp edges or that is too big, you could end up hurting or killing your snail. One of the downsides of turret snails, and most snails, is that if left unchecked they can breed. Before you know it, you may have a lot more snails in your tank than you want. Next up are Ramshorn snails. Just like turret snails, Ramshorn snails are similar in size and lifespan, growing up to 1 to 1.5 inches in length and living for a year. As well as this, they also require the same pH and temperature as betta fish do, so you don't have to worry about changing your tank to meet any requirements. Ramshorn snails are best for tanks that don't have a lot of plants in them. While they normally scavenge food off the floor, if they can, they may start eating your plants. The good news is if your tank doesn't have any live plants in it, Ramshorn snails can still live off algae and old food. Once again, Ramshorn snails are the kind of snails you can put in your tank and forget about, as long as the conditions are good. With all snails, you need to be wary about how much they're reproducing. If they have an abundance of food, they will reproduce at an incredible rate. Assassin snails. Assassin snails are the snails you turn to when other snails are overrunning your tank. They reproduce slowly and they have one meal that they favour above the rest. As you can probably guess by their names, assassin snails eat other snails. However, don't worry, if you don't have any snails in your tank, an assassin snail can still eat food left on the bottom of the tank, as well as algae and dead plants. It's important to make sure that your assassin snail is getting meat though, so if there aren't any snails in your tank, try adding some freeze-dried bloodworms or other meat. Your betta will love this too. Assassin snails are the hardest to keep on this list, but that doesn't mean you should worry. As long as you keep your water parameters good, you shouldn't have a problem. I'd only add assassin snails to your tank if you really need them. Because of their size, your betta may see them as more of a threat and begin to attack them. They can grow up to 3 inches in size. But if other snails are overrunning your tank, then they are your best option. Mystery snails. Mystery snails are another type of snail you can add to your tank. They're easy to look after as well, and they don't need any special care. If you want to introduce mystery snails with your betta, just make sure they're getting enough food. This normally isn't a problem if pellets or food are reaching the substrate, your betta won't eat them, but they will make a good meal for your mystery snail. Mystery snails can grow up to 2 inches in length and live for a year. They also prefer similar pH and temperature to bettas. Nerite snails. Nerite snails are the smallest snail on this list, growing only a quarter to half an inch, but that shouldn't be overlooked, because they are the best snails for removing algae. However, with Nerite snails, you're going to have to be a little bit more careful because they like a pH slightly more alkaline than Bettas, preferring a pH at about 7.5. But as long as you keep the temperature and pH steady, you shouldn't have a problem. Nerites are also a nice choice because you can get so many different variations of them. They always come in different colours and with different patterns that look beautiful. If you don't mind a snail that needs a little more care, then Nerite snails could be best for you. And remember, make sure that you're feeding all of your snails enough, especially food rich in calcium. Snails need calcium to help their shells grow, so you have to incorporate feeding calcium-rich food into their diet. Will snails clean your fish tank? You may have heard that snails are good for cleaning your fish tank, and while this is true, it is a little bit misleading. It is true that they will eat any material on the bottom of the tank that you'd otherwise have to clean yourself. However, they still produce almost as much waste. If you plan on having snails in your tank, you'll still need to clean it. If you don't, the water conditions could deteriorate. Once they've deteriorated, any snails you have in your tank could rapidly die, and there's also a risk of your Betta getting sick as well. So yes, snails will clean debris and algae out of your fish tank, but they're also going to leave their own waste behind. Snails and algae. Don't be tricked into thinking that all snails like algae, because the truth is some snails like it a lot more than others. If you want to add snails to your tank purely for their ability to remove algae, then you should introduce Nerite snails. They will eat a lot more algae than other snails, as well as anything on the bottom of your tank too. However, that doesn't mean the other snails won't clean up algae too. Ramshorn snails and mystery snails also eat algae from time to time, and they can both survive without having live plants in the tank if they're getting fed properly. Snails and plants. If you've got a planted tank, you may be worried about snails eating them. The good news is this doesn't happen as often as you think. In fact, as long as you're feeding your snails enough, they should leave the plants alone. A lot of aquatic plants carry toxins in them, which deter snails from eating them. What to do with a dead snail? Having anything dead in your tank is going to be bad for the health of your Betta, as well as any other living creature, so it's important to know when to spot and remove dead snails. The first thing you'll notice is that your snail is lying completely motionless. Keep an eye on the snail, and if you notice in the same position for more than a day, you'll have to take it out. Use a net to scoop the snail out of the tank. If your snail is dead, normally it will have a pungent smell when you remove it from the tank. Oftentimes, the inside of the shell will be completely empty as well, because your Betta has eaten it. Some people like to leave their snails in the tank when they're dead. This way, when their shell starts to rot, they add nutrients to the water. If you plan on doing this, just pay extra attention to the amount of nitrates and ammonia in the tank. What's the ideal tank size for snails? If you only plan on adding a couple of snails to your Betta's tank, then you'll only need a 5-gallon tank. But just like fish, snails also produce their own bioload. If you want more snails, then you're going to have to upgrade the size of your tank accordingly. And if you are housing more than 5 to 10 snails, you have to make sure that your tank can handle a sudden increase if they start reproducing. A 5-gallon tank is fine to start off with, but when you want more snails, you'll need to upgrade to a 10-gallon. So can Betta fish live with snails? Yes, snails can make a great companion to your Betta, providing he's not too aggressive. However, if you're not sure how your Betta is going to react to them, then it might be a good idea to have another tank ready to move them. To go over some of the main points, here is what you should remember. Even if your Betta has a good temperament, they may try to eat your snails, especially if your Betta is hungry or the snails are small. There are so many different snails you can choose from, and they're all going to have their benefits in your tank. If you want a snail that cleans algae, you should buy Nerite snails. If your snails are overbreeding, then you should introduce assassin snails into your tank to eliminate them, or stop feeding your Betta as much. Even though you think snails can clean any waste food and decay, they're also going to produce a lot of waste as well. If you see a dead snail in your tank, you should remove it. Dead snails can begin to decay, making the water dirtier as well as causing ammonia and nitrate spikes. If you do plan on adding a couple of snails to your Betta tank, then the minimum size you're going to need is 5 gallons. However, with an increase in snails, you'll need to increase your tank size. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to know more about tank mates, then I highly recommend buying my ebook down below. Otherwise, have a great day.